In today's episode, I start a brand new module, paint up a cliff face from scratch, and do some fiddly scenic work. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, That Model Railway Guy, for another video update on my ongoing project to get Pitley Steam Railway, aka the Modular Model Railway, ready for an exhibition in just a few weeks' time. As before, this episode has kindly been sponsored by D-Rails and Model Railway Scenes. Thank you to both of them for sponsoring this video, and I'll be talking more about them later on. Last time out, I completed the scenics on the final curve module, which means I currently have a fully scenic layout to take to the exhibition. However, it is a bit cramped on the inside, and it would be great to extend the layout slightly to give me a bit more space when I'm operating, and also to give the trains a longer run too. So today I'm going to be working on a brand new module from start to finish, which is going to go in between the curves at one end of the layout. It's a bit shorter than the normal straight modules I've built in the past, but I'm really excited for this one because I'm going to have a go at building a cliff face. So here's the starting point. I have a blank baseboard to work with, and you can see the end plates have already been attached. Obviously this is a shorter module than the usual straight ones. In fact, it's pretty much half the length, so two of these would make up one of the station modules. I'll start off by putting down a base layer of cork for the track to sit on, and this will be held in place using some spray adhesive. With the glue down, the cork was then placed over the top. And I use some weights to make sure it stays flat while it dries. It didn't take long before it was securely fixed to the board, and so I was able to get the track in place, and you can see I've already soldered on some feeder wires. The position for these feeders were then marked so that I could drill holes through the baseboard for them. At the same time, I also drilled some holes for the brass screws that will hold the rails at the end of the modules. The feeder wires were then pushed through their holes and the track was brought down into position. And as this is such a short section of track, I'm just going to use some super glue to hold it down. Again, I put weights over the top to hold it all down while it dried. Then the rails at the very ends were soldered to the brass screws while lined up with the markings on the end plate. I deliberately cut the track a little bit longer than I need so that I have a bit of wiggle room, and this way I can grind the rail back to the perfect length using the Dremel and also create a nice clean edge. Underneath though, the track needed to be wired up, which starts by getting the bus wire in place. You can see I've attached a couple of hooks to the underside which the wire just happily runs through. And then the push connectors that I've used on all of my modules are attached to each end of the bus wire. The feeders to the track were then connected to this using some simple splice connectors. Back on top, it's time to weather the track, and for speed I'm going to use an airbrush for this. Basically, I'm spraying the entire track in rail match sleeper grime, which coats everything in a nice grimy brown. The individual chairs are then picked out in their light rust paint too. Obviously this looks very bright at the moment, but it tones down as it dries, and don't forget it'll become more muted as the various scenic layers go over the top of this too. The track is now ready to be ballasted, which on a short section like this really doesn't take long at all. As always, I'm using the Woodland Scenics medium grey blend ballast, just like I have on the rest of the layout. And for those of you wondering, I put links in the description to everything that I'm using today. One little trick I've learned is to lightly tap the rails with the back of a paintbrush. The resulting vibrations then cause any excess bits of ballast still on top of the sleepers to fall down into the gaps. The track is then sprayed with water in preparation for the glue mix to be added that will hold the ballast in place. This glue mix is 50% water, 50% PVA glue, and then a couple of drops of washing up liquid which just breaks down the surface tension. As you can see, this creates a nice watered down glue that flows into all the gaps, and when it dries this should be nice and solid. If you're building a model railway or thinking about starting one, well then you're going to need a great model shop to get all the supplies you need. Personally, I recommend D-Rail's Model Shop, who are supporting the channel by sponsoring this series, and in fact I've been a customer of theirs for a long time, in fact even before I started this channel. It doesn't matter what gauge you model in, D-Rails have it all, with a great stock of track, locomotives and rolling stock in all the major scales from N right up to O gauge, and in fact beyond. You can even get live steam locomotives for garden railways from them, so there really is something for everyone. And of course they have great supplies of modelling materials as well, such as ballast, foliage, grass, anything you've seen in the videos that I'm using, there's a good chance it's available from D-Rails. Check them out at drails.co.uk or click the link in the description, and thanks again to D-Rails for sponsoring this series. Having been left overnight, the ballast is now completely dry, so I can remove the tape from the ends of the module. Currently I've got this board sandwiched between two others, and this will support the end plates as well as giving me a visual indication of how to blend in this section of landscape. First I cut some polystyrene to the same profile as the end plate, which can then be glued in place. The rest of the hill along the back, which will become the cliff face, is also built up using blocks of polystyrene. As I've said in the past, I like using polystyrene mostly because it's so lightweight, which is really important for a portable layout like this one. It's also free since I tend to use stuff that comes as packaging, so that's an added bonus too. With the general structure in place, I then put weights on top of this again to hold it all down while the glue dries. I then do the same for the front part of the module, albeit with a much lower piece of polystyrene. With this also weighted down, I'll then add some simple formers along the front to allow the landscape to slope down towards the track. To create a top surface for the cliff, I've cut out a section of foam board which can now be glued in place as well. And on either side of this, you can see I've added some chicken wire on the slope up to the top, and I'll now cover this using paper mache. I'll also use the same technique along the front of the module to cover up those formers that slope down to baseboard level. The one thing with using paper mache though is that I'll now have to wait a while for this to dry. And then I got bored of waiting. With that now taken care of, I could then put a layer of mod rock over the top to strengthen the whole surface. This is vital for a portable layout, as it needs to be strong enough to withstand the odd bump here and there while it's being moved around. So I know a lot of you are fans of these layout update videos in particular, and if you want to watch the next episode in the series right after this one, well, it's available for channel members right now. All you have to do is click the link in the description and you can become a member too. You'll get early access to new videos in this series before everyone else, along with loads of extra bonus content too. It only costs £1.99 a month, which works out to less than 50p a week, so a lot less than Netflix, and they don't have any model railway content as far as I know. It's time to start work on the actual cliff face. Here I have some rocks which I've cast in plaster using Woodland Scenics molds, and now it's time to paint them. The first step is putting on a base coat of grey over the entire rock. Now I'm watering this paint down so that the white shines through in some places to create some variation in the colour. Don't add paint to the plaster when you're making the rocks, as this will give you a really flat, unnatural colour. By watering the paint down, it gathers in all the little cracks and details, while open areas can be a bit thinner, and this creates some natural light and shade. Next up, I'm adding random dots of a reddish brown paint over the rocks. This looks very odd initially, but again I'm going to add water over the top of these to really blend the colour into the grey. I'm literally just brushing water over the top of these and letting the paint run. Basically, you just want there to be a hint of the browny red on the face of the rocks. I found this can be a really effective technique though for creating additional variation, and you can experiment with different colours too. You might just be able to see here I've got some patches of yellow on the left too. I'm also going to do this with a darkish green colour to simulate some water or moss that's run down the rock face at some point in the past. For this, I'm strictly sticking to the cracks in the rocks. I'm looking for where water would gather and run down a rock formation when it rains, for example. And of course, adding natural water over the top of this really helps, as that will flow naturally down through the cracks. You can also add a bit of this green around the bottom of the rocks too if you like, just where they're sitting against the damp ground and moss might start to grow. The final step is to then give everything a black wash just to tie it all together. This will pick out some of the details, tone down some of the colours, and makes the highlights a little bit more noticeable too. Back on the layout, before I add the rocks to the side of the cliff, I need to paint this whole area brown. I don't want the white of the polystyrene showing through, so it's easier to paint this whole thing now rather than having to paint between the rocks later on. I'll also go right up to the edge of the track here too, as it'll be easier now than after the rocks are in place. The rocks can then be added to the polystyrene side with a blob of filler on the back. Putting a rock face together like this is a bit like doing a jigsaw puzzle. You have to figure out how to fit it all together in the best way. The great thing about using filler to hold the rocks in place though is that you could adjust them as needed to fit other rocks in. With the rock face now in place, the rest of the module can be painted brown. And for those of you wondering, this is just cheap acrylic paint. Generally, I mix in a small amount of black to darken the brown to more of a dirt colour. Speaking of dirt, as always, I want to create a verge alongside the track, so I'll start by putting down a strip of neat PVA glue. Finely sieved dirt from the garden can then be sprinkled over the top of this to create the verge itself. And I probably could just leave it at that, but I'll seal all this in the same way I do the ballast, by first spraying it with water and then adding glue over the top. This episode is also sponsored by Model Railway Scenes, a great online retailer who have an amazing selection of details for your model railway. They stock several really well-known brands such as Humbrol, ID Back Scenes and Oxford Diecast, to name just a few, but of course the standout is their own range of 3D printed items. I've used their products on a couple of different layouts now, and honestly I'm a really big fan of them. The quality of the 3D prints is amazing and the prices I think are really reasonable too. And Model Railway Scenes have made those prices even better by setting up a discount code just for you guys. So use the code TMRG2023 and you'll get a whopping 25% off on all of their 3D printed items. And there's a lot to choose from. Seriously, head to their website modelrailwayscenes.com to check out everything they have, and don't forget to use that code TMRG2023. Thanks so much to Model Railway Scenes for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to the layout. It's now time for my favourite step, which is adding the static grass. As always, I put down a covering of PVA glue for the initial base layer to stick to. And with this I really want to get into all the nooks and crannies as much as possible. With the board covered, the base layer of 2mm static grass is then added over the top. And already you can start to see just how much this transforms the module. To put on the second layer of grass, I need to mask off these rocks so that they don't get covered with the layering spray. That way we won't have random grass fibres sticking to the rocks. With those now covered up, I can use the layering spray on the 2mm grass, which will help the second layer adhere to it. And now the second layer of longer 4mm static grass can be added to the module. You can see how this makes the grass look much more realistic. It has a more wild appearance and we can really start to see the fibres standing up now. It's introduced a little bit of variation into the colour as well, which is good, but we can always do a bit more. So I'll use the layering spray again, this time in little patches. 6mm dead grass is then added over this, which will give the appearance of the grass having dried out as it tends to do during the summer. I'll also use some 6mm autumn grass in some areas too, just to create a little bit of variation. And that's it for the layering spray now, so the masking tape can be removed from those rocks. As you can see, these have been protected really well underneath, and they now blend into the grass really well. As an extra detail, I'm going to add some small tufts of grass along the dirt verge too, just to break this up a little. With small dots of PVA glued down, a bit more 4mm static grass is added over the top. The excess can then be hoovered up for reuse on another module, so there's minimal wastage here. So in the previous series, I revealed that the name for the station would be Pitley. And as you can see, I now have t-shirts with Pitley on the classic British Railways totem. If you want to get one of these yourself, well, you can. Just head over to shop.thatmodelrailwayguy.com or click the link in the description, and you can show your love for Pitley Steam Railway too. It's available in all different sizes and several colours as well. And don't forget, I also have similar shirts for my other layouts as well. With the holidays coming up soon, this is something a bit fun to add to your Christmas list, and if I spot you wearing one at a model railway exhibition in the future, I will definitely come over and say hello. So yeah, if you want to support the channel and get a cool shirt, click that link in the description to get one today. Now in the previous episode, I added a wire fence along the line side, and I'm going to do the same on this module too, along the edge of the cliff. Using my laser cut fence posts again, these can be pushed down into the holes in the landscape with a bit of PVA glue to hold them in place. I made the holes for these earlier on, and as the landscape here is mostly polystyrene, they were really easy to make just by poking a screwdriver in at each point. By the way, in the previous episode I mentioned I was selling the dry stone walling in my shop, and thank you so much to everyone who has said such nice things about it. I also have these laser cut fence posts available too, so if you're looking at adding some wire fencing to your own layout, definitely check out the link in the description. While the glue on those dries, I need to cover up the gaps between the rocks on the cliff face. This is easily done by adding a bit of PVA glue. Foliage can then be pushed into place, which covers up the gap nicely and breaks up the cliff face a bit too. I'm generally using a mixture of Woodland Scenics fine leaf foliage and their clump foliage too. Similarly, I've added a line of PVA along the back of the module, and more foliage can be added here too. Usually the modules on this layout don't have a defined front or back, but with this one I think I'll always want to have the cliff facing the viewer. As a result, this line of foliage creates a nice scenic break between the rear of the module and the back scene when those are eventually put in place. The fence posts are now dry, so I can start to add the wire to these. The holes for the wire are already pre-cut in the posts, so this is just a case of taking some fine florist's wire and threading it through using a pair of fine tweezers. Generally, I find it easier to start at the bottom and work my way upwards. And this may look a little daunting at first, but I've found you get the hang of it really quickly. In fact, I actually find it very satisfying to do, and the results when the fence is complete are really nice. To finish up, I'll just add a little bit more foliage around the bottom of the fencing. Again, this helps to blend everything in to make it look like the fence has been there for a while. And of course, when I have a bit more time, I'll probably come back and tone down the shiny metal of the wire here as well. With that though, we have another module complete, and I'm really happy with how this has turned out. It's definitely something more different than previous modules, and I think the trains look absolutely fantastic running past this rock face. It's also nice for the trains to have a bit more of a run as well before they disappear around the final corner. In fact, I'll be tackling one of the new corner modules in the next episode, and don't forget that episode is available to watch right now for channel members. If you can't wait to see that, please do consider joining up, and remember there's loads more bonus content you get from being a member as well. That's it for today though, so thank you so much for watching everyone, and here's a quick look at what's coming up in the next episode. I build a new siding, create a yard surface, and add some rusty locos.